Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about the Nintendo Switch 2 reveal, still happening this year, perhaps slightly sooner than expected for some, and a Nintendo Direct also happening sooner than expected as well. This is some exciting stuff, and it's coming from a well-respected journalist within several different Nintendo communities. But before going forward, let me ask that if you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. So the journalist I'm referring to here is Brazil. This is their account on FamiBoard, this is them on Twitter, this is their YouTube channel, The X of Control, and they have these recurring podcasts. And this podcast here, which by the way is in Portuguese, they speak Portuguese, so I don't understand it totally myself. They said some exciting things about the Nintendo Switch 2 and the Nintendo Direct, and fortunately, over here on FamiBoards, Guarana went ahead and watched it, understood what was going on, and explained it here. So they say, according to our own Brazil, the journalist who broke the news about the 2025 Switch 2 release, Nintendo seems to have brought forward some plans regarding the Switch 2's release schedule. Some presentations, he doesn't specify which ones, that were scheduled for the end of September seem to have been brought forward to the next couple of weeks. That's exciting. It suggests the Switch 2 release is not too far off, and that we may be learning about it fairly soon, as in this calendar year. But also, multiple presentations that we may have been getting in September could be happening a fair bit sooner, like within the next couple of weeks. What might those be? Perhaps a Nintendo Direct, perhaps a Pokemon Presents, perhaps an Indie World? We'll be talking more about those possibilities in a moment here. Continuing on though, he also says that the current podcast should be one of the last before news about the Switch 2 really starts to pop up. He also adds, and this just seems to be his personal opinion, that the Switch 2's release schedule will follow more or less the same route as what we saw with the Switch 1. Now in terms of what he's offering with his opinion here regarding the Switch 2's release schedule and it being similar to the Switch, that would essentially imply that we would be getting some kind of trailer fairly soon. October 2016 is when they showed off the Switch for the first time, but then we had a huge presentation in the beginning of 2017, January, and then about 6 weeks later, the very beginning of March, the console released. So maybe we're looking at something very similar here. That's what other reports have indicated in the past, or at least that's what's been the current plan up to this point. According to Brazil, based off what he's interpreted from what he's heard, his opinion is something similar seems to be going down. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that exactly we'll get a trailer in October. Maybe it's November, maybe it's September. And it doesn't mean that the full-on blowout reveal will be in January. It could be a bit later. And maybe Switch 2 doesn't come out at the end of the fiscal year, but just a bit later, maybe like April or May. These are possibilities, but it still would be fairly close to the overall idea of how Nintendo handled Switch 1. Now, the big difference here is if Switch 2 does come out, say, April or May, that would fall within the next fiscal year and not this one. So I would still lean towards Switch 2 coming out by the end of this fiscal year, in other words, before the end of March. But Brazil also talks about how Switch 2 news should be really starting to pop up soon. But because he thinks the Switch 2 will be following a fairly similar schedule to Switch 1, perhaps when he's talking about news for Switch 2, it's more so things like rumors and leaks, a lot of things that we discuss here that are apparently coming from credible places, or at least semi-credible places that have gotten things right in the past. I mean, just yesterday we put out a video talking about different discoveries made about the Switch 2 that could pertain to a fast charger and a cooling fan inside the dock. So maybe that's the kind of news that Brazil is referencing here, and more things like this might just start to pop up as we approach a potential reveal, perhaps because Nintendo is also about to really start ramping up production. So they would reveal the console to control the messaging, avoid the leaks, and also get us ready because the console's not that far off. That could be the case here. But something Brazil also said very recently, "Oh, I'm glad you guys already have a thread up for this. You might need it sooner rather than later." And this is on the Nintendo Direct speculation thread. So the implication is that a Nintendo Direct is coming sooner than later. And when we factor what's being said here about Nintendo bringing forward some plans that were going to be happening in September, different presentations, what could be going on here? Well, Brazil also spoke about an indie world. So Vicente on Family Board said this: "You mentioned there'd be an indie world in August. That's still happening, Brazil? Not in August, September. And before anyone claimed I'm saying the date changed, I'm not. As always, information gets clearer as we edge closer to things." So considering what Brazil is saying here, 1, this indie world is happening in September, not August. However, this part about other plans being brought forward, perhaps this has more to do with things clearing up, and now it appears that as opposed to September, these presentations that Brazil was expecting are happening in August. One of those could be some form of a Nintendo Direct, and another maybe is a Pokemon Presents. The last 3 years, we've had a Pokemon Presents in August, so it feels fairly reasonable to think that another one could be happening this August as well. Perhaps that's part of what Brazil is referring to here. But the bigger one, obviously, is a Nintendo Direct. We already mentioned how a few days ago he was suggesting it could be happening sooner than later. Typically, we get a general Direct in September, so if it's happening sooner, well, we're already in the middle of August, so either it's early September or like a week or 2 from now. Now, what might this Direct be? Because I personally have speculated that it wouldn't be a normal Direct. We are in the middle of this transition for Switch 2, and because of that, we may not be getting the typical style of Nintendo Directs. If it's happening in August, that's already out of the pattern, but we may not even have enough material for it to be a proper general Direct. I'll even point out that earlier this year in February, where we typically get a normal general Direct, we didn't. We just got a partner showcase. It lacked a variety of Nintendo announcements. Now there was Endless Ocean, but that was it. And I think that could also have something to do with this transition over to Switch 2. The kind of games we're getting this year isn't quite measuring up to the same level of sales potential as other years. Now, the previous June Direct was extremely hype, a very good one, but perhaps that's because it's going to be the sole big general Direct of this year, and it will be the last big general, and Nintendo will do something else for the Switch. They'll have slightly lower expectations, maybe a Nintendo Direct Mini, maybe another partner showcase. Considering that we already have games lined up all throughout the holidays already, and that Nintendo, earlier than expected, has started dating games for next year with Donkey Kong Country Returns HD this January. Normally, they don't start dating games like that until the September Direct. That could be a hint that Nintendo is indeed going to have big Switch 2 release plans in the early parts of next year. So I'm not necessarily expecting a full-on general this August, but a mini or a partner showcase, very conceivable. Another angle I'll throw out there is that maybe we're going to get a game-specific Direct. A few days before we had this Zelda Echoes of Wisdom blowout, I suggested that we might get a big presentation for Zelda Echoes of Wisdom in the form of a Direct, because 1, we kind of needed news around this time, but also 2, every year there's at least one game-specific Direct, and we haven't gotten that this year. Now, maybe because we are in the middle of this Switch 2 transition year, they're not going to do something quite like that, but it is a possibility. We've already gotten a lot of news for Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, so maybe they're not going to do it for that. But also, it wouldn't be the first time that Nintendo's given us a lot of news on a game, and then still given us a game-specific Direct, and then still put out a bigger Direct 1 or 2 weeks later. It's happened multiple times. Look at Splatoon 3, look at Mario Wonder. It could happen again. But if I had to place my bets, I'm going to say that there will be a Nintendo Direct Mini. We'll see what actually happens, obviously. And a Pokemon Presents. And then in September, there will be the Indie World. And then in late September or October, we'll get the Switch 2 teaser. Now, I will mention that I have previously predicted a Switch 2 reveal in August. I haven't lost all hope, but based off this information here, it would have me leaning more towards later, which does, of course, make some level of sense. It always did. Even when I made that prediction, I talked about how August, September, or October would be the months that would make the most sense for a Switch 2 reveal. Now, my reasoning for the reveal happening a bit sooner would be to have it happen before Gamescom at the end of this month. And then the argument for why it should happen in September is so it could be before the Tokyo Game Show at the end of that month. And the reason why I think it makes sense to show off this console before these events is because if there's going to be a lot of third parties making announcements for this console, perhaps you would want this to be public so they can start making those announcements. But of course, Nintendo can still have the reveal in October, and then third parties that are involved with the launch will just have those announcements made after the fact. And announcements about the Switch 2 at Gamescom or Tokyo Game Show simply just don't matter that much. Now, before closing out here, there's a few things I would like to speak on. 1. This information is not confirmed information. I think that's obvious, but with Brazil, while a lot of people hold them in high esteem, and I'm not trying to take away from that in any way, they have discussed things in the past that have not come to fruition. Likely because plans changed. I don't think it's because they're lying or because they have false info. I feel like I have a pretty good understanding for how these things go. When you're talking about things that have yet to have been announced, there's always flux. Or sometimes you just don't have all the information, and so the interpretation of that information may be a bit off. So in other words, take this with a grain of salt. Maybe things don't happen exactly the way you're sort of thinking based off what's being said here. And then also, I'm relying on this translation here, which most people seem to agree with, but it is a translation. I don't speak Portuguese. So perhaps something could be lost in translation as well. Regardless though, Brazil is widely respected and believed to have contacts that would give him this kind of information. I am inclined to believe that, and it does have me optimistic that things are about to really start ramping up soon. And so while I'm trying to temper my expectations here, there is this welling up of excitement for what could be around the corner. A Pokemon Presents, some kind of Nintendo Direct, and then a Switch 2 reveal not too far afterwards. All this year within the next couple months. That sounds very, very exciting. And I'll go back to what was said about his recent podcast being one of the last ones before Switch 2 news really starts to pop up. He has podcasts every week, so perhaps within the next couple weeks we're going to start to get some cool Switch 2 stuff. I'm excited, but what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.